Haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Nun Hey Amud Aleph at the very top. Regarding Tisha B'Av, our Mishnah taught us that doing malacha on Tisha B'Av depends on the minhag hamakom. If the minhag of that place is to do malacha, one may do malacha. However, if the minhag of that place is not to do malacha, he must not do malacha. The Mishnah goes on to say, even in a place where the minhag is to do malacha, Talmidei Chachamim are betelim from doing malacha, since they have an acute awareness of the avelus, with the loss of the Beis Hamikdash and the Hasharas Hashchina. It's befitting them not to be diverted from their avelus by doing malacha, and therefore they shall desist from doing malacha. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel in the Seif of our Mishnah then states, La'oila Adam Yasa Atzmoi Talmid Chacham. A person should always make himself a Talmid Chacham. And over here he's referring to specifically that in regards to doing malacha, one should then desist from doing malacha so he can too also then focus on the avelus. Says the Gemara, Lememra de Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Savar Lo Chashinon Liyuhara V'Rabbanan Savei Chashinon Liyuhara. Does that mean to say that Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is not concerned about a behavior of yuhara, of arrogance, when a person is acting in a way that's not befitting his status? He certainly is not at that level. And he's not concerned about that over here, because he says a person should make himself a Talmid Chacham and not do malacha, even though everybody around him is doing malacha. Yet the Chachamim say he should do malacha if everybody else is doing malacha, because they are concerned about yuhara. Ask the Gemara, behold, we hear the opposite from their opinions. In regards to Kriya Shema, it states as follows, this nan. Chasonim yirtze likrois Kriya Shema, laila harishoin koire. On the first night, when a person gets married, the chasan mi'ikar hadin is potter from saying Kriya Shema, because he may not have the proper kavanah. It's hard for him to even have the kavanah, because he has tirdas hamachshava. So therefore, mi'ikar hadin, he is potter from saying Kriya Shema. However, says the Chacham, if he wants, he can go ahead and try to say Kriya Shema even Laila Harishon. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Oymar Loi Kol HaRoitze Litol Es Hashem Yitol. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says no. A person who's not of the stature of a Yeresh Shamayim, who cannot go even one night without saying Big Makabel Ol Malchus Shamayim, he cannot go ahead and say Kriya Shema if he's not on that status. It's yuhara. It's a display of arrogancy. Omar Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan says, Muchlefes Hashita. You have to turn around the shitas in one of these mishnayos to make it consistent. Otherwise, you're left with a stira. Says the Gemara, another mahalich. Rab Shisha bereid Rav Idi Omar lo teipuch. You don't have to switch around the shitas. We have a contradiction. Again, in Tisha B'Av, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is mashma. There's no problem with yuhara. One can desist from doing malacha even though everybody else around them is doing malacha. Whereas the Chachamim say the opposite. Yet, when it comes to Kriya Shema, there, the Chachamim say he can say Kriya Shema even though he's not been madrega. Yet Rav Shimon Gamliel says, no, it's yuhara. Answers the Gemara, the Rabban lo kasha. The stira, what seems to be a contradiction within the Chacham, is not a contradiction. As follows. Over here, says the Chachamim, since everybody around him is doing malacha, and now all of a sudden he stops, he desists, and does not do malacha, then it appears to be yuhara. But in regards to Kriya Shema, everybody around him is saying Kriya Shema, so he also says Kriya Shema together with everybody else. It's not yuhara. The Rabbi Shimon Ben Gamliel, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Kasha. There seems to be a contradiction within Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Also, is not difficult because Hasom hu deba in kavana ve'anan sahade deloy motzi kavne daite mechzik yara. When it comes to Kriya Shema, where you have to have kavana to say Kriya Shema, you have to have kavana for those 6 words: Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. In addition to the kavanah that you're being mekayim a mitzvah, the araisa of being mekabel ol malchus shamayim, of yichud Hashem, you also have the kavanah for the words themselves. And therefore, we testify that a person who's a chosin, who has tirdas hamachshava, is not going to be able to be mechavin. Therefore, it appears to be yuhara. Aval hocha, but in regards to Tisha B'Av, excuse me, loi mechzik yuhara. Amrei malacha hi de lesle. They say he's not doing malacha. Puk chazi kama batloni ikad b'shuka. So what? Look at the shuk. How many people are not doing malacha? He's one of many others who are not doing malacha either. So therefore, it's not an action, a display of yuhara. Our Mishnah now returns to the very first Mishnah in the Perek regarding minhagim of doing malacha on Erev Pesach koitem chatzois. Says the Mishnah, v'chachamim oimrim beYehuda hayu oisin malacha ba'arvei Psachim ad chatzois. In Yehuda, the southern part of Eretz Yisrael, they did not do malacha on Yudalid before chatzois. They did malacha on Yudalid before chatzois. Ubegalil loy hayu oisin kol iker. Whereas in the Galil in the north, they would not do malacha kol iker. What about the night before? The fact that in the Galil they did not do malacha, does that mean that they already did not do malacha from the night before? That only began in the morning. Says the Mishnah, halaylo, it's a machlokes. Beishamai oisrim. Beishamai says it's prohibited to do malacha even at night, the night before. Ubeis Hillel matirin ad hanetzacham. Whereas Beis Hillel says it is mutter at night. Once netzachama, the beginning where the sun becomes visible, that is going to then begin the time where it's also to do malacha. Ask the Gemara right away, mi'ikara tana minhaga ulevesoif tana isura. Ask the Gemara, wait a second. The first Mishnah talks about minhagei hamakim in regards to doing malacha on Erev Pesach Kodem Chatzos. And the beginning of this Mishnah as well, the Chacham state that in Yehuda the minhag is to do malacha, whereas in the Galil not to do malacha. And yet in the Seif of the Mishnah it states Beishamai oisrim, they prohibit mashma, that's mi'ikar adin, it's also. Rabbi Yochanan loy kasha. Rabbi Yochanan says it's not a contradiction. We can explain as follows: Ha Rabbi Meir, Ha Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir is the opinion of that it's a minhag, whereas Rabbi Yehuda is the opinion that it's meikar adin. The Tanya, it says in the following brayso. Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says Be Yehuda hayu oisin malacha ba'arvei Psachim ad chatzois. In Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda says they would do malacha even on Erev Pesach before Chatzois, ubegalul ein oisin kol iker. Omar loy Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir then turns to Rabbi Yehuda and says to him, Maraya Yehuda v'galil bekan. What kind of proof is this that Yehuda does malacha and Galil does not do malacha? What kind of proof is that in regards to doing malacha on Erev Pesach before Chatzois? Depends on minhag makom. And therefore, whether Yehuda does malacha or the fact that Galil does not do malacha, it's independent of the place, whatever their minhag makom will be. So therefore, what are you coming to say? In other words, Rabbi Meir holds that it's a minhag, whereas Rabbi Yehuda does not say it's a minhag. He's saying it's mi'ikar hadin. As the Gemara explains now, midikoma Rabbi Meir minhaga. And that's why he argues on Rabbi Yehuda. He says, why are you telling me about Rabbi Yehuda? Why are you talking about what they do in Yehuda and what they do in the Galil? It's anyways only minhag. So from the fact that we see that Rabbi Meir holds as minhag, michlal de Rabbi Yehuda isura kama. It follows that Rabbi Yehuda, when he was saying that it's iser. V'sov Rabbi Yehuda asked the Gemara, arbosar muter ba'asiyas malacha. Is it so that Rabbi Yehuda then holds that on the 14th it is muter to do malacha? Is that so? Meaning in Yehuda it's mutar meikar hadin. Ask the Gemara, V'hatanya, behold, it states in the following brayso regarding the oimer. Now, the oimer was a korban of a minchas oimer made out of sa'arim, flour offering of sa'arim of barley. It was brought on the second day of Pesach, and once it was brought, then all of the grains now become grains that are mutar to eat. That means to say anything that had hashrosha, that was already taken root beforehand, and now the korban omer is brought, then all of those produce will be able to then be eaten. However, any that takes root only afterwards, subsequent to the Korban Omer, is off limits. Says the Gemara V'Hatanya, it states in the Brisa, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Hamenakesh b'shloisha asar v'nekro b'yodoi. If a person, he weeds on the 13th of Nisan, and while he's weeding, he is oiker, he takes out a type of grain from the ground in his hand. So it states over here in the Brisa, shoislo b'mokom hatit ve'in shoislo b'mokom hagarid. He can go ahead and replant it in a place where it's muddy, where it's moist, so that it'll take root, and therefore then be something that's mutter after the Korban Omer is brought on the 16th of Nisan. Whereas he should not plant it in a dry place because then it will not have enough time to take root. Explains the Gemara, Bishlosha asar ein in ba'arba asar loi. On the 13th, yes, but not on the 14th. Michti, the Gemara wants to understand this. Shamina leile Rabbi Yehuda de Omar. We hear from Rabbi Yehuda that said, Kol har kavo she'eina koletes l'shloisha yamim shuv eina koletes. Rabbi Yehuda says in regards to Shavis that something can be planted before 3 days of the new year, because then it would then have enough time to take root before the Isser Shvius comes on. So we see that according to Rabbi Yehuda, it requires 3 days for it to take root. And if you want to say on the 14th, one can do malacha. Why do you have to say that a case of the 13th? That when he then weeds on the 13th and he accidentally takes and uproots a type of grain in his hand, he can go ahead and replant it in a muddy, in a moist area. Why do you have to talk about the 13th? You can even say the 14th. Because then it will be the 14th, the 15th, and 16th, Mixas Hayom Kekula, and therefore, since partial of the 16th is considered to be a full day in regards to the halacha, thereby it's considered to be then mutter in regards to then after the Korban Omer will be brought. It won't be confused with all the other grain and think that it is something that is not permissible, because it would have been enough time for it to then, yes, be considered to be Yashon. So you would have 3 full days according to Rabbi Yehuda. So therefore, if indeed Malach is mutter on the 14th, then it would be plausible. Why do you have to choose a case of the 13th? It's mashma, therefore, that 14th you cannot do malacha. So how could Rabbi Yehuda say in the area of Yehuda it was mutter to do malacha? Omar Rava said the obvious answer. Begolil shanu. In that case where he was taking out weeds, it was on the 13th, it was talking about in the Golil. And therefore you're right, he can't do malacha on the 14th. Ask the Gemara, but you have the night. He could have done the malacha the night before, and therefore he can still count 14th, 15th, and Mixas 16th, Mixas Hayom Kekuloi. Rav Sheishes said, Kibei Shammai, like Beis Shammai, who says that it's also to do malacha even at night, and therefore we're talking about in the Galil, and they could not do it at night. Therefore, you have to count from the 13th. Rav Ashi Omar la'olam kebeis Hillel. Even you can say like Beis Hillel, indeed, that it is mutter at night. Lefisha ain't dark and shel b'nei odom l'nakish b'layla. But it's not the way of a person to take weeds out and do weeding at night when he cannot see, because it's likely to then uproot good types of produce. Ravina Omar, Ravina said, La'oilom biYehuda uvahashrasha. He says, in truth, we're talking about in Yehuda, not the Galil, in Yehuda, where it's mutter to do malacha on the 14th, and we're talking about where it took root. But the only thing is, it's not going to be viable over here if he did it on the 14th. And that's why you have to count the 13th. Why? Says the Gemara, because Chad mixas hayoim kekula armin. We say, in regards to then mixas hayom kekuloi, we say it once. But trey mixas hayom kekuloi lo yamrina. We don't say it twice. And therefore, since if he would be talking about a case where he did the weeding on the 14th and uprooted one of the grains accidentally on the 14th, so then for him to replant it on the 14th means that the 14th itself is mixas hayom. That would be saying mixas hayom kekuloi. The 15th would be a full day, but again, on the 16th, it would be saying, Miksas Hayom Kekuloi. And we can only say that once. We don't say that twice in regard to something taking root. And therefore, we must say that even according to Rabbi Yehuda, in the area of Yehuda where they do say Malacha is permitted on the 14th, over here he'd have to say a case, it's talking about then he did so on the 13th when he weeded and took out the weeds and replanted it. It was on the 13th.